Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for a quick chat with Jussara Bierman. Jussara, you're in Christchurch for Education New Zealand. You're running a seminar today talking about targeting the education sector in China in particular, aren't you? You're living in Shanghai, so how did a Kiwi girl end up in Shanghai?
First went to China in the Olympic period in 2008, so I spent 3 weeks in Beijing watching all the games and then spent another month travelling from Hong Kong back up to Beijing. Since then I've been back and forth most years. I went over for the Expo in 2010 and last year really decided that it was time to move there and be on the ground. We were doing a lot of work with New Zealand companies exporting to China.
Who's we doing a lot of work?
Rare HQ, our company, we're a branding agency.
Right.
So working with a lot of New Zealand products exporting to China, and I really thought rather than sort of helping them from here, it would be better to have a presence in China so we could really help them on the ground in China when they got there.
And you enjoy living in the big cosmopolitan city that is Shanghai?
Yes, it's very social, very active lifestyle. Obviously, weather and pollution and that sort of thing as a Kiwi can be quite hard at times, but you know, you're out every night of the week, and it's quite easy to make a good group of friends.
Is it really? You know, so you've made friends with local Chinese people?
Making friends with Chinese people can be quite difficult because often the cultural differences are quite large, and a lot of them aren't confident enough in their English language skills. So most of my friends have come through playing Gaelic football in Shanghai. So
really?
A mix of Irish, English, Americans, as opposed to sort of just sticking with the Kiwi network.
Now, we all know that New Zealand's had a long and close association with China. We've got a free trade agreement. There's a lot of opportunities for New Zealand companies in China. How do we get into those opportunities? How do you make the contacts? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, being involved in China is obviously, it's a large time commitment. It's something that New Zealand companies tend to think they can succeed there overnight because the opportunities are so large, but in reality it's going to require more time, more resource, more input than probably getting into any other market. So it's really a matter of being up there as much as you can.
How do you establish yourself there? How do you start making those contacts?
I guess the good place to start would be going through someone like Education New Zealand or New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, just sort of identifying your opportunities that there are there and contacting them and saying, where can I start? Or otherwise, looking at which New Zealand companies are already working in China and leveraging off them. Because Kiwis are quite happy to help out with the Kiwis.
Yeah, that's right. Do you find the Chinese community, the Chinese companies are open to doing business with New Zealand companies and individuals?
Yeah, I mean, it's slowly changing. Obviously, there's a lot of issues around the differences in the way in which, Western companies tend to do business as opposed to Chinese companies. So the way contracts are done is, means a lot more to, say, a foreign company than it would necessarily to a Chinese one. And there's a lot of, it's a bit of a dance in terms of, getting a sort of an agreement up to date. There's a lot of whining and dining and getting to know families and things like that
so
sort of take place.
So it's a big relationship building is what you're saying.
Yeah, massively relationship.
What are some of those differences in doing business here in New Zealand to doing business in China? You said there are business differences. What are they?
A big thing is often sort of when a contract's being signed. So, a typical foreign company will go in with a big contract and, and Chinese companies will quite happily sign a contract, but it might not necessarily mean anything to them. Often they will sign it because they see that as being a way to please you and keep you happy. Whereas, and the other difference is they'll often say yes. So if you've got an agreement, we want this to happen, they will say yes, but really for them that's yes, we will consider it, and yes, that's a platform in which to further negotiate.
How do you know that? How do you learn that?
Probably through some bad experiences,
right.
Or just learning from other New Zealand companies that have been up there. I mean, obviously not many companies want to go up there and burn time and money, so it's best to look at the case studies and ask, for education, ask other providers that have done well or haven't done well, what happened in those cases.
Have you got a few do's and don'ts? You must shake hands this way, you must present a business card this way, just to start those first impressions off on the right foot. Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of etiquette in terms of even just giving a business card. It's a two-handed give. A lot of New Zealanders will, when they receive someone's business card, they might write on the back where they've met them and any key notes. That would be seen as being quite disrespectful.
Right.
Even down to the way in which you lay out business cards on a table in a meeting. You want to always have the highest member of the opposing party at the sort of the top of the chart and then sort of working down quite hierarchical. So it can be.
There's lots of little subtleties like that.
There are, and a lot of it, you know, Chinese have this whole saying of saving face or face. So they, you know, it's you've got to be really mindful that you don't embarrass them in any way, you know, and that you're addressing, you know, the most senior member of the party as opposed to sort of asking questions of a junior that might then be hesitant to answer because they don't want their senior to lose that face.
Yeah, it's a trick, isn't it?
It is.
Do many people get put off when they start down this path?
I think so. I think a lot of people, without knowing the differences in the culture, and again, they'll get a contract signed, they'll see that as being the first step, and yet, you know, that might just, again, be an opening of a door. And so a lot of people will spend, you know, 6 months then from when a contract's been signed just negotiating, you know, the details and what the mutual benefits are. And I think the underestimation of the time that it can take.
You've got to be committed.
Yeah, you've got to be. And you've
right.
got to be focused on long term or it's, you know, it's just not going to happen.
I guess the Chinese community does focus on generations, don't they? They're not just thinking about this year, next year, they're thinking about 10, 20 years down the track.
And it's definitely changing as well. I mean, you've got a lot of younger Chinese now that are getting into business and the way in which, it, you know, they've potentially studied abroad, so the way in which they undertake business is starting to change and becoming a lot more Western. But, you know, if you're working with, say, education providers in China, they're still going to be very hierarchical and very old-fashioned, so you need to be mindful of that, really.
Okay, for those international marketers of education from New Zealand schools, what's your experience with them once they land in China? You know, what can they expect?
I think the biggest thing, especially for schools, is that they tend to go to China on delegations and that they go on very tightly packed sort of trips. So they see a lot of agents, they do a lot of travelling, they might go to an education fair. And, you know, when you look at it in reverse, if you meet a Chinese agent, they might take you to dinner, they will wine and dine you, and they will treat you as if you're one of a kind and that you might be their only school that they list. Whereas in reverse, we pack, you know, 2 or 3 agents in a day. You know, we probably tell the agent we can't stay, we've got to leave. So just sort of doing that dance and, you know, reverse, saying to the agent, oh, we've come especially to China to visit you. You know, we've got no other, if you want to go to dinner, yes, we've got time to go to dinner. So just really sort of, I guess, you know, acting Chinese in the way in which you want to do business up there.
Right. What would you say the Chinese agents are looking for from New Zealand schools? What's important to them that they can then tell parents and students who are looking for education in New Zealand? Yeah,
I mean, Chinese business has done a lot around prestige, and so agents, you know, wanting schools that are going to offer families a great amount of admiration and schools that these families can then promote to their greater families and their friends, that my child goes to this very prestigious school in New Zealand. And obviously the greater amount of that the agents can sell, it means that the more students that they've got. So yeah, it's a huge thing about word of mouth and the luxury and the prestige that comes out of it.
One thing we're all very proud of in New Zealand is our space, our access to the great outdoors. Is that important to the Chinese market?
I think predominantly in New Zealand we tend to advertise that too much. And I mean, part of it, you have to remember, you know, Chinese culture is, there's a big shift now from rural to urban. And so a lot of Chinese families have spent a long time getting themselves out of urban rural environments, because that's, you know, potentially been a peasant lifestyle for them. So what we're offering is, you know, leaving highly dense cities to come to a very quiet, you know, rural lifestyle. So that might not be the most attractive thing, you know. Predominantly Chinese tourists, when they come to New Zealand, they want to, you know, they want to see the outdoors, but they also want to know that there's a shopping mall down the street, and they want to, you know, be experiencing with other people, because it can make them feel quite uneasy.
So if a school's promoting themselves, obviously the outdoors is something, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
No.
Is it more the lifestyle activities of their town and community that's important, as well as the education?
I think, you know, when parents are sending their kids abroad, you know, they are the ones that are probably making the end decision, because they have the one child, very precious sort of child, who's often there's the pressure to achieve and then provide for that family down the track. Their probably key driver is seeing, you know, imagery and marketing materials that promote, you know, things like high technology. Do you have the latest computers? You know, what are the study facilities like? You know, their large libraries. And probably in terms of the outdoors, it's an idea of fitness and health. So, you know, we have fresh air, access to, you know, safe foods, and that, you know, if there is a lot of landscape and environment, that it's seen as a fitness and exercise, as opposed to a, you know, lie by the beach for the day, because they want to know when the study's happening.
There's work going on, is what they want to know. What's some good examples of marketing by New Zealand schools, New Zealand companies into the Chinese market?
It's a bit of a tough question.
Off the top of your head, sorry, put you on the spot.
That's all right. I think a lot of New Zealand providers tend to put a lot of emphasis on the clean, green environment. But the ones that I think do well, you know, they use sort of student testimonials and that sort of thing, and video content to really highlight that, yes, you have this outdoor living, but it's also a very structured, you know, learning environment that you know, you still promotes creativity and innovation, and you can mix with a multicultural environment, and all the other sort of things as well.
Should they start getting into social media, the Chinese social media as well? Is that something that New Zealand schools need to start doing?
Yeah, I mean, when you consider the cost and the time that goes into, you know, into getting into the China marketplace, things like social media are a great use. I mean, you know, if you can create profiles quite easily, that you know, no cost. But obviously, it's the same way. You want to interact with social media the same way you would as on Facebook and Twitter. You know, it needs a constant presence. You need to be giving engaging content. It needs to be regular. And I think part of the problem is New Zealand providers don't have that on the ground help, whether it's at the school themselves or in China, that can be updating this content in Chinese.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's when the struggle is. The page will be set up, but nothing's obviously promoted on it. So it's sort of a negative thing as well, because if an agent says, oh, well, this is their, you know, Chinese social media page, and they have maybe 10 followers, it's sort of, that can be quite a negative sort of impact.
Right, it's not working. Hey, well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Like, we could sit here and chat for ages, but I appreciate it. If we get in Shanghai, we should pop in and see you.
Definitely, and third
is it
Friday.
Like a Kiwi thing? We run into you every sort of down the main street there?
Third Friday of the month is the Kia Kiwi drinks, so Kiwi expats abroad. So I always say to people, if you come to Shanghai, try to time it for the third Friday of the month.
Okay.
And you get a night drinking and eating Kiwi food and drink.
Hey, thanks a lot. See you later.
No worries, thanks, mate.